What if the exhausted man, in seat 12 Farads, wearing a faded leather jacket and carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag, wasn't just another weary traveler heading home? What if he once commanded missions so classified that even his service records were sealed in vaults 3 stories underground? And what if the moment a female F-22 squadron commander stepped onto that plane, an entire legacy thought lost forever suddenly came roaring back to life? Vertical bar. This is the story of a forgotten legend, a daughter waiting at the gate, and the day the sky reclaimed a hero the world had erased from memory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The boarding gate at Logan International Airport hummed with its usual chaos. Business travelers barked into headsets about quarterly earnings and missed deadlines. Families wrestled with strollers and diaper bags. College students slouched against walls, earbuds in, eyes glazed. Amid the orchestrated disorder, nobody paid attention to the man moving through the crowd like smoke through fingers. Xavier Grant walked with the kind of quiet efficiency that comes from years of deliberate invisibility. His shoulders were broad but not aggressive. His stride was measured but not hesitant. Dark brown hair fell just past his collar, slightly unkempt but not careless. He wore a black leather jacket that had seen better decades, its surface scarred with creases and faded patches where the sun had stolen the color. Slung across one shoulder was a canvas duffel bag, olive green and beaten into softness by time and travel. Most passengers would have dismissed it as surplus store junk, but tucked into a corner seam, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a small embroidered patch. A silver phantom, wings spread, eyes forward, no words, no explanation, just the image. The gate agent scanned tickets with mechanical precision, barely glancing at faces. When Xavier approached, she tapped her screen and paused. "Mr. Grant," she said, looking up briefly. "You're in 27C today. Aisle seat, back of the cabin." Before Xavier could nod, her earpiece beeped. She pressed it, listened, then frowned slightly. "Oh, actually, sir, there's been a last-minute change. We had a maintenance flag on some rear cabin seats. We're moving you forward to 12 Farads." Xavier blinked once. "First class?" She smiled apologetically, more like premium economy with extra legroom. "We appreciate your patience." He gave a single nod and continued down the jet bridge, unaware that seat 12 Farads was about to become the most significant seat he'd occupied in over a decade. The cabin was already filling when Xavier stepped inside. Soft lighting gave the space a golden glow. Leather seats gleamed under overhead vents. The faint scent of lavender cleaning solution lingered in the air. It was designed to feel exclusive, aspirational. But Xavier had seen too much of the world to be impressed by upholstery. He moved down the aisle toward row 12. And that's when he noticed the man in 12E. Dylan Porter sat with his legs stretched into the aisle, designer loafers polished to a mirror shine, tailored blazer draped over the seat back. A platinum watch caught the light every time he gestured, which was often. He was on a call, speaking loud enough for 3 rows to hear. No. I told them the presentation needs to be flawless. If they can't deliver, we pull funding. Simple as that." Xavier stopped beside row 12. "Excuse me." Dylan glanced up, eyes sweeping over Xavier's worn jacket and duffel bag. His expression shifted from neutral to faintly amused. Hey," Dylan said, not moving his legs. "You sure you're in the right section?" A few nearby passengers glanced over. One man smirked. A woman in row 11 raised an eyebrow. Xavier kept his voice calm. 12 Farads. That's my seat." Dylan made a show of checking his phone, then slowly, deliberately, pulled his legs back. "Right, of course, my bad." Xavier slid into 12 Farads, placing his duffel under the seat in front of him. He didn't respond to the sarcasm. He simply sat, buckled in, and stared straight ahead. Across the aisle in 12D sat a woman in a charcoal business suit, her hair pulled into a sleek bun, a leather portfolio balanced on her lap. She glanced at Xavier once, then twice, her gaze lingering on the frayed cuffs of his jacket. In the galley near the front, Flight Attendant Madeline Brooks finished her pre-flight checklist. She was only 6 months into the job, still adjusting to the rhythm of service, the unspoken hierarchy among passengers, the way some people demanded attention while others faded into the background. As she walked down the aisle doing a visual sweep, her eyes landed on Xavier. Not because he stood out, but because he didn't. He sat perfectly still, hands resting on his knees, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the seat in front of him. There was something about him, a kind of presence that took up no space but somehow filled the room. She noticed the corner of his duffel bag, the stitching, the faint outline of a patch. Strange, she thought. Looks military, but not standard issue. She continued down the aisle, making mental notes, but her mind kept drifting back to seat 12 Farids. Meanwhile, Dylan had resumed his call. Yeah. I'm on the plane now. Should land in Seattle by 6. First class, obviously. The woman in the suit, whose name was Chloe Martinez, shifted uncomfortably. She worked in veteran outreach for a nonprofit and had learned to recognize certain tells: posture, eye movement, the way someone held silence. This man in 12 Farids, he wasn't trying to blend in. He just was. She leaned slightly toward him. Excuse me. Xavier turned his head, his expression neutral but not cold. You prior service? She asked quietly. Xavier paused before answering. Used to be. What branch? Air Force. Pilot? He hesitated. Something like that. Chloe studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and returned to her portfolio. But the gears in her mind were turning. Something about his answer felt incomplete, not evasive, just careful. Dylan, overhearing the exchange, chuckled under his breath. Let me guess. Flew cargo planes? Maybe refueling tankers? Xavier didn't respond. Come on. Dylan pressed, grinning now. What's the call sign? Maverick? Iceman? Still nothing. Dylan shrugged and went back to his phone, but the seed of mockery had been planted. A few passengers had heard the exchange. Some looked curious, others looked uncomfortable. As the plane began to taxi, Madeline returned to the front galley. She pulled out her phone discreetly and typed into the search bar, Silver Phantom Patch Military. The results were sparse. A few forum threads, some speculation about discontinued units. Nothing concrete. She frowned, tucked the phone away, and prepared for takeoff. Outside the window, the runway stretched long and gray under a cloudy Boston sky. Xavier watched the ground crew moving in coordinated silence, their hand signals precise, their movements economical. He knew that language. He'd lived it. In his jacket pocket, folded small and soft from handling, was a handwritten note on lined paper. The handwriting was careful, looping, the kind that comes from someone still learning cursive. Dear Dad, I can't wait to see you. I drew you a picture of the plane you used to fly. Love, Summer. He didn't take it out. He didn't need to. He'd read it 100 times already. The engines roared. The plane lifted. And for the first time in years, Xavier Grant felt the pull of gravity in reverse, the strange ache of leaving the ground, the memory of what it meant to fly. But he wasn't flying anymore. He was just a man in seat, 12 Farids, heading home to the only person who mattered. Or so he thought. The hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm as the plane climbed through the cloud cover and leveled off at cruising altitude. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, casting a soft amber glow over the rows of passengers. Most had already reclined their seats, pulled out laptops, or closed their eyes. The flight from Boston to Seattle was just under 6 hours, long enough to disappear into work, sleep, or distraction. Xavier Grant did none of those things. He sat upright, hands resting lightly on the armrests, his gaze fixed on the seat back in front of him. To anyone watching, he might have seemed tense, uncomfortable. But the truth was simpler. He was just still. Stillness was something Xavier had learned a long time ago. Not the restless kind that came from boredom, but the disciplined kind that came from waiting. Waiting for orders. Waiting for clearance. Waiting for the moment when everything depended on not moving too soon. Now, years removed from that life, the stillness remained. It had become part of him, woven into his posture, his breathing, the way he occupied space without demanding it. In the seat beside him, Dylan Porter had finally ended his call and was scrolling through emails on a tablet. Every few seconds, he sighed dramatically, as if the weight of his inbox was a burden worth broadcasting. Across the aisle, Chloe Martinez opened her portfolio and began reviewing grant applications. Her organization worked with transitioning veterans, helping them find housing, employment, mental health support. She'd seen too many slip through the cracks, forgotten by the system they'd once served. It made her attentive to certain details, the way someone carried themselves, the quality of their silence. She glanced at Xavier again, just briefly. His jacket was old but well maintained. His hands were rough, calloused, but his nails were clean. His boots were worn but not falling apart. He wasn't homeless. He wasn't desperate. But he also wasn't polished. Wasn't trying to impress anyone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Who are you? She wondered. Behind them, in row 14, an elderly man with a veteran's cap leaned forward, squinting at the back of Xavier's seat. He couldn't see the patch from this angle, but something about the man's posture triggered recognition. He'd seen that bearing before. In mess halls. In briefing rooms. In the eyes of men who'd flown into places others refused to go. The man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "That fellow up there, row 12, he's one of ours." His wife glanced up from her book. "How can you tell? You just know." Meanwhile, Madeline Brooks moved through the cabin with a beverage cart, offering drinks with practiced efficiency. When she reached row 12, she paused. "Can I get you anything, sir?" she asked Xavier. "Water, please." She handed him a small plastic cup and a bottle. "Anything else?" "No, thank you." She moved to Dylan next. "And for you, sir?" "Scotch, neat, and maybe some pretzels if you've got the good kind, not the cardboard ones." Madeline smiled politely, poured the drink, and handed over a snack pack. As she moved on, Dylan took a sip and leaned slightly toward Xavier. "So, cargo pilot, huh?" Xavier didn't look at him. "Never said that." "Well, you didn't say much of anything, which usually means there's not much to say." Xavier turned his head slowly, meeting Dylan's eyes with a calm, unwavering gaze. "Or it means there's too much." Dylan blinked, momentarily unsure how to respond. Then he laughed it off. "Fair enough, man. Fair enough." But the laugh was hollow, and Dylan knew it. An hour into the flight, turbulence rippled through the cabin. Nothing severe, just enough to rattle cups and jostle shoulders. The seatbelt sign chimed on, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we're hitting some light chop. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Most passengers complied immediately. But, in row 9, an older woman fumbled with her seatbelt, her hands shaking slightly. The buckle slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Before anyone else could react, Xavier unbuckled, stood, and moved up the aisle. He knelt beside her seat, retrieved the buckle, and gently guided it into place. "There you go," he said softly. The woman looked up at him, startled, then smiled. "Thank you, young man. My hands aren't what they used to be." "No trouble at all." He returned to his seat, just as the turbulence eased. The seatbelt sign clicked off. Chloe had watched the entire exchange. She leaned toward him. "That was kind." Xavier shrugged. "Just helping. Most people wouldn't have moved. Most people aren't paying attention." She smiled faintly. "You always this observant?" "Comes with the territory." "What territory is that?" Xavier looked at her for a moment, then turned back to the window. "The kind you leave behind." Chloe didn't push. She could tell when someone was carrying weight they didn't want to unpack. Instead, she returned to her work, but her curiosity had deepened. Madeline returned to the galley and pulled out her phone again during a quiet moment. She searched. Discontinued Air Force units, phantom insignia. This time, a single forum post appeared from 8 years ago. Does anyone remember Phantom Squadron? Heard. They were a Black Ops unit. Totally off book. No records, no acknowledgement. Supposedly disbanded after some classified incident. Anyone have intel? The replies were vague, speculative. One user claimed it was a myth. Another said they'd heard stories from a friend of a friend. Nothing concrete, nothing verifiable. Madeline stared at the screen, then glanced down the aisle towards seat 12 Farrads. Could it be? She tucked the phone away, unsure what to do with the information, or if it even meant anything. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight poured through the windows, painting the cabin in gold. Below, the landscape stretched endlessly, a patchwork of fields, forests, and rivers. Xavier watched it all pass, his mind drifting to a different sky, a different time. He remembered the weight of a helmet, the hum of instruments, the crackle of radio static. He remembered voices calling his name, not Xavier, but something else. Something he'd left behind. In his pocket, the note from Summer seemed to pulse with warmth. He could almost hear her voice, bright and insistent, asking when he'd be home, if he'd bring her something from the trip, if he'd teach her how to fly a kite the way he'd promised. He smiled faintly. She was 9 now, growing faster than he could keep up with. She had his eyes and her mother's determination. And every day, she reminded him why he'd walked away from the sky. Because some things mattered more than legends. Some things mattered more than call signs. Some things were worth landing for. But as the plane cut through the clouds, carrying Tim closer to home, Xavier had no idea that his past was about to collide with his present in a way no one could have predicted. Not even him. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin had settled into a predictable rhythm. Passengers dozed. Laptops glowed. Headphones blocked out the world. The flight attendants moved quietly, refilling drinks, collecting trash, answering the occasional question. Everything was routine, unremarkable, exactly as it should be, except for the tension simmering in row 12. Dylan Porter had grown restless. He'd exhausted his emails, skimmed through 3 news articles, and scrolled past 24 social media posts. Boredom made him careless, and carelessness made him cruel. He glanced sideways at Xavier, who hadn't moved in over an hour. Still sitting upright, still staring forward, still silent. "Hey," Dylan said, louder than necessary. "You ever actually fly anything? Or were you just ground crew?" Xavier didn't respond. Dylan smirket. "Come on, man. Don't be shy. I'm genuinely curious. What did you do? Load cargo? Fuel tankers? Sweep runways?" A few passengers nearby glanced over. Chloe Martinez looked up from her portfolio, frowning. Xavier finally turned his head, his expression calm, almost bored. "Does it matter? I mean, yeah," Dylan said, leaning back with exaggerated confidence. "If you're gonna sit here in first class, or whatever this is, playing the quiet veteran card, people are curious. You got a story or not?" Xavier's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "I don't play cards." Right. The strong, silent type. Very noble. Dylan took another sip of his drink. "But let's be real. If you'd actually done something impressive, you'd probably talk about it." Chloe had heard enough. She leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Or maybe he doesn't need to prove anything to strangers on a plane." Dylan raised his hands in mock surrender. "Whoa. Okay. Just making conversation." "No," Chloe said. "You're making assumptions." Dylan shrugged and returned to his tablet, but the damage was done. The passengers who'd been listening now looked at Xavier with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. Was he really a veteran, or just someone wearing the costume? In the back of the cabin, the elderly man with the veteran's cap whispered to his wife again. "That boy up there doesn't need to say a word. I can see it in how he sits, how he waits. That's not something you fake." His wife patted his hand. Then why doesn't he defend himself? Because he doesn't need to. Madeline returned to the aisle, sensing the shift in atmosphere. She paused by row 12, glancing at Xavier. "Everything okay here, sir?" Xavier nodded. "Fine." She looked at Dylan, her expression neutral but firm. "And you, sir?" Dylan waved her off. "All good." She moved on, but made a mental note. Something about this situation felt fragile, like a string pulled too tight. Meanwhile, Xavier reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded note from Summer. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases with his thumb. The handwriting was looping and uneven, the drawing beside it even more so. A stick figure, with long hair standing beside a plane with oversized wings. "That's you, Daddy. You're the one who flies the fast planes. Love, Summer." He stared at it for a long moment, then refolded it and tucked it back into his pocket. Chloe watched the gesture, her expression softening. "Your daughter?" Xavier nodded. "How old?" 9. "She waiting for you in Seattle?" "Yeah." His voice was quieter now, almost tender. "Been gone 2 weeks, longest I've been away since her mom passed." Chloe's breath caught. "I'm sorry." Xavier gave a small, sad smile. 3 years now. Cancer. She fought hard. That must have been difficult. It was. But Summer keeps me going. She's got her mother's fire. Chloe smiled gently. "She's lucky to have you." Xavier didn't respond, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Dylan, overhearing the data exchange, shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something he didn't like. Guilt, maybe. Or shame. He cleared his throat. "Look, man, I didn't mean to, come off harsh or whatever." Xavier glanced at him. "You didn't come off harsh, you came off insecure." Dylan blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." The cabin fell silent around them. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. Xavier's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "You spent the last 2 hours trying to figure out if I'm worth your attention. That says more about you than it does about me." Dylan opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked away, face flushing. Chloe bit back a smile. Madeline, passing by again, caught the tail end of the exchange and had to suppress a grin of her own. An hour later, the plane hit another patch of turbulence, this time more sustained. The seatbelt sign chimed on again, and the captain's voice returned. "Folks, we're encountering some moderate chop. Flight attendants, please take your seats." Madeline moved quickly toward the jump seat near the galley, but as she passed row 7, a young boy, maybe 6 or 7, started crying. His mother tried to soothe him, but the shaking rattled his nerves. Xavier unbuckled and stood. "Sir," Madeline said, "you need to sit down." "I will. Just give me a second." He moved to row 7 and knelt beside the boy. "Hey, buddy. You okay?" The boy sniffled, shaking his head. "You know what this is?" Xavier asked gently, gesturing to the turbulence. "It's just the plane riding waves, like a boat on water." "Ever been on a boat?" The boy nodded. "Same thing. The plane's strong. It knows what to do. You're safe." The boy's breathing slowed. His mother mouthed a silent thank you. Xavier returned to his seat just as the turbulence eased. Dylan watched him sit down, then looked away, something shifting behind his eyes. Chloe leaned toward Xavier. "You're good with people. I'm good with the ones who matter." She smiled. "And the ones who don't? I just ignore them." Dylan, pretending not to hear, sank lower in his seat. Outside, the sun began its descent, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. The plane pushed forward through the sky, steady and sure. And in seat 12 Farrads, Xavier Grant sat quietly, thinking about the daughter waiting for him at the gate, the life he'd built away from the noise, and the name he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it himself. Almost. But not quite. Because some names don't disappear. They just wait. And sometimes, when you least expect it, they come back. The afternoon light, streaming through the cabin windows, had begun to soften, taking on that golden quality that appears just before evening. Most passengers had settled into their private worlds, reading, working, or sleeping. The earlier turbulence had passed, leaving behind a calm that felt almost meditative. Xavier Grant remained in his characteristic stillness, but his eyes tracked everything. The flight attendants moving through their routines, the passengers shifting in their seats, the small moments of human interaction that most people never noticed. In row 8, a woman in her 70s struggled to retrieve a book that had slipped beneath the seat in front of her. She bent forward, her hands searching blindly, fingers grazing the carpet, but missing the target. She tried again, grunting softly with the effort. Xavier unbuckled quietly and moved up the aisle before anyone else registered the problem. He knelt beside her seat, reached under with one smooth motion, and retrieved the book. A worn paperback mystery, its spine cracked from multiple readings. "Here you go," he said, placing it gently in her hands. She looked up, startled, then smiled warmly. "Oh, thank you, dear. These old bones don't bend like they used to." "No trouble at all." Xavier returned to his seat without waiting for further thanks. The woman turned to her husband beside her. "What a nice young man." Chloe Martinez had watched the entire exchange. She leaned slightly toward Xavier. "You make a habit of helping people?" Xavier shrugged. "It's just paying attention. Most people don't pay attention. Most people are too busy thinking about themselves." Chloe smiled. "Guilty as charged sometimes." "We all are," Xavier said. "The trick is catching yourself doing it." Behind them, Dylan Porter had been listening. He shifted uncomfortably, pretending to focus on his tablet, but Xavier's words had hit something tender. He thought about the last hour, the way he'd mocked this man, judged him based on appearance, tried to elevate himself by diminishing someone else. It wasn't a good feeling. Madeline Brooks approached with the beverage cart again, offering refills. When she reached Xavier, she paused. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Sure. That patch on your bag, the silver phantom, what does it mean?" Xavier looked at her for a long moment. "It means I used to be part of something that doesn't exist anymore." "What kind of something?" "The kind people don't talk about." Madeline felt a chill run down her spine. There was no bravado in his voice, no attempt to mystify or impress, just a simple statement of fact, delivered with the weight of truth. "Were you a pilot?" she asked. "I flew," he said, "but that was a long time ago. Do you miss it?" Xavier glanced out the window at the endless sky beyond. "Every single day. But missing something doesn't mean you should go back to it." Madeline nodded slowly, then moved on with the cart. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing in the presence of someone extraordinary who'd chosen to become ordinary. 20 minutes later, a commotion erupted 3 rows back. A middle-aged man had stood up abruptly, his face pale, one hand clutching his chest. His wife beside him gasped, "James, James, what's wrong?" Several passengers turned. Someone called out, "Is there a doctor on board?" Madeline rushed toward the scene, her training kicking in immediately. "Sir, can you hear me? Are you in pain?" The man nodded, breathing heavily. "My chest feels tight." Madeline reached for the intercom button, but before she could press it, Xavier was already there. He'd moved so quickly and quietly that no one had seen him stand. "Let me through," he said calmly. Madeline stepped aside instinctively, something in his tone commanding immediate trust. Xavier knelt beside the man. "Sir, I need you to sit down slowly. That's it. Nice and easy." The man lowered himself back into the seat, still clutching his chest. "Are you having trouble breathing?" Xavier asked. "A little. Tightness in your chest? Pain radiating to your arm or jaw?" "Just tight." Xavier placed 2 fingers on the man's wrist, checking his pulse. He counted silently for 10 seconds, then looked at Madeline. "Get me the oxygen and the AED. Just in case." She nodded, and rushed to the forward galley. Xavier kept his voice steady, calm. "Sir, I need you to take slow, deep breaths with me. In through your nose, hold for 3, out through your mouth. Can you do that?" The man nodded, following Xavier's breathing pattern. Slowly, his color began to return. His breathing steadied. Madeline returned with the portable oxygen tank and placed the mask gently over the man's face. Xavier adjusted the flow, monitoring him carefully. "How do you know how to do this?" Madeline whispered. "You learn a lot when lives depend on it," Xavier replied. The man's wife was crying softly. "Is he going to be okay?" Xavier looked at her with reassuring eyes. "I think it might be a panic attack, but we're not taking chances. We'll keep him on oxygen and monitor him. If anything changes, we'll land early." The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, this is Captain Bowen. We've been alerted to a medical situation on board. We're prepared to divert if necessary, but our crew is handling it. Please remain seated." 10 minutes later, the man's breathing had completely normalized. His color was good, his pulse steady. Xavier removed the oxygen mask. "How do you feel?" Xavier asked. "Better. Much better." The man looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I've been so stressed lately. Work, family stuff. I think it just caught up with me." "Nothing to apologize for," Xavier said. "But you should see a doctor when we land. Get checked out properly." The man nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I don't even know your name." "Xavier." "Well, Xavier, you might have saved my life." Xavier shook his head. "You're going to be fine. Just take care of yourself." He returned to seat 12 Farrads, and as he sat down, the entire cabin seemed to exhale collectively. Passengers who had been watching began to murmur among themselves. Some looked at Xavier with newfound respect, others with curiosity. Dylan Porter stared at him openly now, all pretense of superiority gone. "Where did you learn to do that?" Xavier didn't look at him. "In places where help doesn't arrive in time." Dylan swallowed hard. "You're not just some guy, are you?" Xavier turned his head slowly. "I'm exactly some guy. The difference is what that guy used to do." Chloe leaned forward. "You were special operations, weren't you? Search and rescue? Medical evac?" Xavier's silence was answer enough. She sat back, her mind racing. This wasn't just a veteran. This was someone who'd operated at the highest levels. Someone trained to handle crisis with precision and calm. Someone whose name probably appeared in classified files, not public records. Madeline returned to the galley, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She pulled out her phone and typed again, "Phantom Squadron Search and Rescue Special Operations." One result appeared, buried in a military forum from 6 years ago. Phantom units were rumored to be rapid response teams for situations too dangerous for standard ops. They went in when everyone else pulled out. No records, no medals, no trace, just ghosts. She looked down the aisle at Xavier, her heart pounding. Could he really be one of them? Outside, the sun continued its descent, and the plane pushed westward through the sky. Inside, Xavier Grant closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself a moment of quiet. In his pocket, Summer's note seemed to glow with warmth. He could almost see her face, hear her laugh, feel her small hand in his. He was going home, and nothing, he thought, could stop that now. But he was wrong, because 20 miles ahead, an Air Force base was receiving an unusual alert, and on that base, a commander was reading a passenger manifest with widening eyes. The cabin had grown quieter after the medical emergency. Passengers who'd witnessed Xavier's calm competence now stole glances at him when they thought he wasn't looking. The elderly veteran in row 14 had stopped whispering to his wife and simply watched, a knowing expression on his weathered face. Dylan Porter hadn't spoken in over 30 minutes. He sat with his tablet dark in his lap, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked like shame mixed with reluctant admiration. Every so often, he'd glance at Xavier, open his mouth as if to say something, then close it again. Chloe Martinez had abandoned any pretense of working. Her portfolio lay closed on her lap while she processed what she'd seen. The way Xavier had moved, the medical knowledge, the command presence that emerged naturally without effort or announcement. This wasn't someone who'd served in a support role or spent their career behind a desk. She'd worked with enough special operations veterans to recognize the signs. The situational awareness, the controlled calm, the ability to assess and act while others were still processing what was happening. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite identify. A quality of absence in the records, as if Xavier Grant had been deliberately erased from official memory. Madeline Brooks returned to row 12 with a bottle of water. "For you," she said, placing it on Xavier's tray table. "On the house, after what you did back there." "Not necessary," Xavier said. "I insist." She paused. "Can I ask where you learned emergency response?" "Here and there." "That's not an answer." Xavier smiled faintly. "It's the only one I've got." Madeline studied his face. There were lines around his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into bright skies or harsh conditions. His hands, resting on the armrests, were marked with old scars, faint white lines that spoke of burns, cuts, and years of hard use. "You know what I think?" she said quietly. "What's that?" "I think you're someone people used to depend on. And I think you walked away from it because staying would have cost too much." Xavier looked at her directly, and for the first time since boarding, his expression softened into something vulnerable. "You're perceptive. Comes with the job. You learn to read people at 30,000 feet. Then you know why I don't talk about it." Madeline nodded. "Because it's not about you anymore. It's about what you're going home to." "Exactly." She smiled and moved on, but as she reached the galley, she pulled out her phone one more time. This time, she searched for something different. Xavier Grant, Air Force pilot. Nothing. She tried variations. X. Grant, Xavier G. Phantom Squadron. Still, nothing. It was as if he'd never existed in any official capacity. No service records. No commendations. No photographs. Not even a mention in alumni databases from military academies. How do you disappear someone that completely? She wondered. Back in row 12, Chloe finally broke her silence. "I've worked with a lot of veterans," she said. "Helped them transition back to civilian life. Find jobs, get housing, access benefits." Xavier listened but didn't respond. "I've met SEALs, Rangers, Marine Recon, Air Force, PJs, all kinds of special operations people." She paused. "But I've never met anyone who doesn't exist in the system." Xavier turned to look at her. "Maybe I just fell through the cracks." "No," Chloe said. "Cracks are accidental. You were erased on purpose." Xavier's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. "I'm not trying to intrude," Chloe continued. "I'm just trying to understand. Because the way you handled that medical emergency, the way you carry yourself, the way people instinctively trust you, that's not normal. That's trained into someone who operated at the highest levels." Xavier sighed quietly. "Some operations don't make it into the history books. Some missions succeed precisely because no one knows they happened. And some people serve best by disappearing when it's over." "Is that what you did? Disappeared?" "I tried to, but it follows you anyway." Xavier looked out the window at the darkening sky. "Every single day." Chloe leaned back, processing. "The patch on your bag. Phantom. That's not just a cool name, is it? It was a designation. For what kind of unit?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The kind that went in when everyone else was told to stand down, when the mission was too dangerous, too political, too likely to fail, when deniability was required. Chloe's breath caught. Black Ops. Xavier didn't confirm or deny it. He simply returned his gaze to the window. Behind them, the elderly veteran had heard every word. He leaned toward his wife. "I knew it," he whispered. "Phantom. I heard rumors about them in the 90s. Thought they were just stories. What kind of stories? His wife asked. The kind where planes go into hostile territory with no backup, no rescue, no acknowledgement. If they succeed, the mission never happened. If they fail, they never existed. His wife shivered. That's horrible. That's necessary. Sometimes. Up in the cockpit, Captain Miles Bowen received an unusual transmission on a secure military frequency. He frowned, adjusted his headset, and listened carefully. Commercial Flight 4127. This is Edwards Air Force Base. We're showing your current position and requesting confirmation of passenger manifest. Bowen glanced at his co-pilot, who shrugged, equally confused. Edwards, this is 4127. Confirm manifest request. Is there a security concern? Negative on security concern. We're attempting to verify the presence of a specific passenger. Name: Grant, Xavier. Seat 12 Farads. Bowen's eyebrows shot up. Stand by, Edwards. He pulled up the digital manifest on his screen. Scrolled to seat 12 Farads. Grant. Xavier. Confirmed. Edwards, passenger confirmed in seat 12 Farads. What's this about? There was a pause on the other end. Then a different voice came through, female, crisp with authority. Captain Bowen, this is Commander Elise Porter, 144th Fighter Wing. We're going to need you to make an unscheduled stop at McCord Air Force Base, outside Seattle. Your flight path already takes you close. We'll provide priority clearance. Commander, I need a reason. We have passengers on schedule. The reason is classified. But I can tell you this. The man in seat 12 Farads is someone we've been looking for. And now that we've found him, we need to make sure he knows he's not forgotten. Bowen felt a chill run through him. Is he in danger? No. But he's about to be honored. Bowen took a breath. Understood. Adjusting flight path for McCord. ETA 35 minutes. Thank you, Captain. McCord out. Bowen switched to the cabin intercom and chose his words carefully. Folks, this is your captain. We're going to be making a brief, unscheduled stop at McCord Air Force Base, just outside Seattle. This won't affect your final arrival time significantly. We'll provide more information shortly. Thank you for your patience. The cabin erupted in murmurs. Passengers looked at each other, confused. Dylan pulled out his phone to check the flight path. Chloe frowned, her mind racing. And Xavier Grant, sitting quietly in seat 12 Farads, felt his stomach drop. He knew what this meant. Somehow, someone had found him, and his carefully constructed anonymity was about to shatter. The announcement hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, pulling out phones, checking maps, whispering questions to each other. An unscheduled military stop wasn't normal. It wasn't casual. It meant something had changed. Xavier Grant's hands tightened on the armrests. His breathing remained controlled, but Chloe, sitting close enough to notice, saw the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes stopped tracking the cabin and fixed on a single point ahead. You okay? She asked quietly. Xavier didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, They found me. Who found you? People I thought I'd left behind. Chloe's pulse quickened. Is that a bad thing? I don't know yet. Dylan Porter leaned forward, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. What's going on? Why would the Air Force want this plane to land at a military base? Xavier looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. Not angry, not afraid. Something closer to resignation. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, Xavier said. Even when you dig the grave yourself. Dylan opened his mouth to respond, but the words died on his lips. There was something in Xavier's tone that discouraged further questions. Madeline Brooks appeared in the aisle, her professional smile strained. She could feel the tension radiating from seat 12 Farads like heat from a furnace. Sir, she said to Xavier, the captain has asked me to let you know that when we land at McCord, there will be personnel waiting to speak with you. He wanted to make sure you were aware. Xavier nodded once. Thank you. Is there anything I can get you? No. I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. Madeline could see it, and so could everyone else paying attention. In the cockpit, Captain Bowen received another transmission. Flight 4127, this is McCord Tower. We have you on approach. You're cleared for priority landing on runway 29er. Ground crew is standing by. Copy that. McCord. Beginning descent. Bowen switched off the radio and looked at his co-pilot. 20 years flying commercial. I've never had the military request a specific passenger before. You think he's in trouble? No. I think he's important. There's a difference. How important are we talking? Bowen shook his head. The kind of important where they don't tell you anything because knowing would be a liability. The plane began its descent, angling toward the base. Through the windows, passengers could see the geometric precision of runways, the angular shadows of hangars, the rigid formations of military aircraft parked in perfect rows. Xavier stared out at it all, memories flooding back. The smell of jet fuel, the sound of engines at full throttle, the weight of a helmet, the feeling of pulling G-forces in a hard turn, the voices of his squadron in his headset, calm and professional even when everything was falling apart. He'd walked away from all of it. Chosen his daughter over the sky. Chosen peace over adrenaline. Chosen anonymity over legacy. And now the sky was calling him back. Chloe placed a hand gently on his arm. Whatever happens down there, you don't owe them anything. You already gave enough. Xavier looked at her, surprised by the gesture. Thank you. I mean it. You're going home to your daughter. That's what matters. That's all that's ever mattered. The plane touched down smoothly, tires kissing the tarmac with barely a jolt. It rolled along the runway, slowing gradually, and finally came to a stop near a cluster of buildings bearing official insignias. Through the window, Xavier could see them waiting. A small group of personnel in dress uniforms, 3 officers, 2 enlisted, and standing slightly apart from the others, a woman in a flight suit with commander's insignia on her shoulders. Even from this distance, even after all these years, Xavier recognized her. Commander Elise Porter, his former squadron leader. His breath caught in his chest. Chloe noticed. You know her. I used to. Good history. Or bad history. Xavier's voice was soft. The kind that saves your life and breaks your heart. The cabin door opened. A jetway extended. But before any passengers could move, a voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated for a moment. We have a brief official matter to attend to. Madeline walked to row 12, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. Sir, they're asking for you. Xavier unbuckled slowly. He reached under the seat, pulled out his duffel bag, and slung it over his shoulder. The phantom patch caught the light, silver against the faded canvas. As he stood, every passenger in first class turned to watch. The cabin fell completely silent. Dylan Porter, for once, had nothing to say. The elderly veteran in row 14 rose to his feet and saluted. Others, uncertain what was happening but sensing its significance, stood as well. Xavier walked down the aisle, and as he passed each row, passengers instinctively rose. It wasn't planned. It wasn't coordinated. It was simply what felt right. By the time he reached the cabin door, every person on the plane was standing. Madeline stood by the exit, tears welling in her eyes. Go get whatever this is, she whispered. Xavier gave her a small nod and stepped through the door. The moment he emerged onto the platform, the wind hit him. Sharp and cold, and carrying the scent of jet fuel and runway rubber. It smelled like memory. It smelled like home. Commander Elise Porter stood at the base of the stairs, her posture rigid, her expression controlled. But Xavier could see it in her eyes. Recognition, relief, something that looked like pain mixed with joy. He descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. When he reached the bottom, Elise stepped forward. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two people who'd flown through hell together, who'd made impossible decisions, who'd trusted each other with their lives, and then lost touch in the way that happens when one person walks away from the only world they've ever known. Finally, Elise spoke. Her voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of emotion. "Xavier Grant, call sign Phantom 1. She paused, then raised her hand in salute. "Welcome back, sir." The other officers snapped to attention and saluted as well. Xavier stood frozen, the wind pulling at his jacket, his duffel bag heavy on his shoulder. He hadn't been saluted in years. Hadn't heard his call sign spoken aloud since the day he'd turned in his wings and walked away. Phantom 1. The name he'd buried. The name he'd tried to forget. The name that, apparently, had never forgotten him. Inside the plane, passengers crowded the windows, trying to see what was happening. Madeline stood by the door, her phone in her hand, recording without even realizing it. And Xavier Grant, the man who'd chosen to disappear, slowly raised his hand and returned the salute. Because some things, no matter how deep you bury them, refuse to stay dead. The salute hung in the air between them, a bridge across years of silence and distance. Xavier's arm remained, raised, steady, and sure, while Commander Elise Porter held her position with the same unwavering discipline she'd carried into every mission they'd flown together. Behind Elise, the other officers maintained their salutes, faces solemn with the weight of ceremony. Ground crew members who'd been working nearby had stopped, tools forgotten, drawn by the gravity of the moment. Finally, both Xavier and Elise lowered their hands simultaneously, the movement synchronized by muscle memory older than either cared to acknowledge. "You're a hard man to find, Xavier," Elise said, her voice carrying across the tarmac despite the wind. "That was the idea," Xavier replied. "We've been searching for 3 years, ever since the declassification review began." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Declassification?" Elise nodded. "Some missions are being unsealed. Not for public record, but for internal recognition. Phantom Squadron is one of them. I didn't ask to be recognized." "No," Elise said. "You never did. That's exactly why you deserve it." She gestured toward the nearest hangar. "We need to talk. Properly. There are things you need to know." Xavier glanced back at the plane, where faces crowded every window. "I have a daughter waiting for me in Seattle. I promised her I'd be there by tonight." Elise's expression softened. "Summer, I know. We have a helicopter standing by to take you to SeaTac after we're done. You'll make it. I promise." Xavier studied her face, searching for deception or manipulation. He found neither. Just the same steady determination that had guided them through missions no one else would touch. "How long?" he asked. 30 minutes, maybe less." Xavier adjusted the duffel on his shoulder. "Lead the way, Commander." They walked toward the hangar, the other officers falling into formation behind them. As they passed beneath the massive door frame, the temperature dropped, and the light changed to the fluorescent glow of interior fixtures. Inside, a table had been set up with chairs, a laptop, and several folders marked with classification stamps. Elise gestured to a seat across from her own. "Before we begin," she said, "I need you to understand something. What we're about to discuss is still classified, but you have clearance. You've always had clearance. You just chose not to use it." Xavier sat slowly. "I chose to leave it behind. I know, and I respect that choice." Elise opened the first folder, but circumstances have changed. She pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It showed a younger Xavier, maybe 10 years ago, standing beside a F-16 fighter jet. His hair was shorter, his face harder, his eyes carrying a sharpness that had since softened into weariness. "Phantom Squadron," Elise said. "Established in 1998, disbanded in 2015. 16 pilots over 17 years. Missions ranging from reconnaissance to extraction to direct intervention in denied airspace. Xavier stared at the photograph. Why are you showing me this? Because of the 16 pilots who served, only 8 are still alive. And of those 8, you're the only one who walked away completely. No contact, no reunions, no memorial services. You vanished. I had my reasons. Your wife, Elise said gently, the cancer. Summer, I know. Xavier looked up sharply. How much do you know? Everything that matters. I made it my business to know. Elise opened another folder, this one containing medical records, obituaries, and school enrollment documents. Xavier's hands curled into fists. You had no right, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I had every right. Elise countered. You were my wingman. My responsibility. When you disappeared, I needed to know you were okay. Xavier stood abruptly, chair scraping against concrete. I'm not a mission objective. I'm not an asset to be tracked. No, Elise said, standing to meet his eyes. You're a hero who's been carrying grief and guilt alone for too long. The words hit Xavier like a physical blow. He turned away, struggling to maintain composure. Elise continued, her voice softer now. The last mission, Xavier. The one in the Strait of Hormuz. You saved 11 lives that night. 11 pilots who would have died if you hadn't stayed on station past your fuel reserves, past your safety margins, past any reasonable operational parameter. Xavier's shoulders tensed. I did what needed to be done. You nearly died doing it. Your engine flamed out over open water. You glided in on fumes and prayers. When you landed, your wings had stress fractures. Your airframe was held together by will and luck. But I made it back. And 3 months later, your wife was diagnosed. You put in for discharge. You disappeared. Elise walked around the table to face him. You left because you thought you'd used up all your luck. You thought if you kept flying, you'd run out before Summer needed you. Xavier's voice cracked. I couldn't leave her alone. Not like my father left me. Elise placed a hand on his shoulder. I know, and no one blames you. But Xavier, you need to hear this. The pilots you saved that night, they've built lives, families, careers. One of them works search and rescue. He's pulled 43 people from disaster zones. Another trains new pilots at the academy. She's shaped a generation of aviators. Another runs a non-profit supporting military families. Xavier looked at her, eyes glistening. Why are you telling me this? Because your sacrifice didn't end with that mission. It multiplied. The lives you saved went on to save others. The legacy you left behind kept growing, even after you walked away. Elise returned to the table and pulled out one final document. A commendation letter, signed by officials whose names carried weight even in classified circles. Phantom 1, she read aloud. In recognition of extraordinary valor, selfless service, and unwavering commitment to the preservation of life, you are hereby awarded the Air Force Cross, our service's second highest decoration. Xavier's breath caught. I can't accept that. You already have, Elise said. It was approved 5 years ago. We've just been waiting to find you to present it. She opened a small wooden box on the table. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was a silver cross with an eagle in the center, suspended from a blue and white ribbon. Xavier stared at it, emotions warring across his face. Pride, shame, grief, gratitude. I don't deserve this, he whispered. Yes, you do. And more importantly, Summer deserves to know who her father really is. Not some washed-up pilot who walked away, but a man who sacrificed everything so others could live. Xavier reached out slowly, his fingers hovering over the metal. She thinks I fixed planes. I never told her I flew them. Maybe it's time she knew. Xavier closed the box gently. She's 9 years old. How do I explain missions I can't talk about? Choices that still wake me up at night? Elise smiled. You tell her the truth, that her father is a hero, and that heroes come home. Outside, the sun had begun to set, painting the hangar doors in shades of amber and gold. Inside, Xavier Grant held the box in both hands, feeling the weight of recognition he'd never sought, never wanted, but perhaps, finally, was ready to accept, not for himself, but for the little girl waiting at the gate, who deserved to know that her father's silence had been protecting something sacred. Her. Back on the plane, the cabin had transformed into a space of hushed anticipation. Passengers remained in their seats, but every eye was turned toward the windows, watching the scene unfold on the tarmac below. Madeline Brooks stood by the open door, her phone still recording, though her hands shook slightly. She'd captured the salute, the conversation, the way Xavier had walked toward the hangar with the bearing of someone stepping back into a life they'd abandoned. "What's happening?" a passenger called from row 5. Madeline turned, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside her. "I think we just flew with someone extraordinary." Dylan Porter had moved to a window seat, pressing his face against the glass like a teenager trying to glimpse a celebrity. His earlier mockery felt like a stone in his stomach, heavy and uncomfortable. Chloe Martinez sat quietly in her seat, fingers drumming against her armrest. Her mind raced through possibilities. Phantom Squadron. She'd heard whispers of it years ago from a veteran she'd helped transition out of service. He'd mentioned ghost units, pilots who flew missions that never appeared in official logs, who risked everything for objectives that would never be acknowledged. She'd thought it was mythology. Apparently, it wasn't. The elderly veteran in row 14 had tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. His wife held his hand, confused by his emotional response. "That boy," he whispered, "that boy is one of the real ones. The kind they write about in classified files that won't be opened for 50 years. "How do you know?" his wife asked. "Because I've seen that look before. In Vietnam. In the Gulf. The look of a man who's carried the weight of others' lives and survived when he wasn't sure he deserved to." A young businessman in row 6 pulled out his laptop and started searching frantically. "Phantom Squadron," he muttered, typing rapidly. "Phantom 1. Call sign. Air Force Special Operations." His searches returned nothing. "This doesn't make sense," he said to the woman beside him. "If he's decorated, if he's important, why isn't there anything online?" The woman, a former military contractor, smiled knowingly. "Because the most important missions are the ones that never happened. And the most important heroes are the ones we never hear about." In the galley, Madeline replayed the video on her phone. The moment Xavier emerged from the plane, the crisp salute from Commander Porter, the way every officer had snapped to attention. This wasn't protocol for a retired pilot. This was reverence. Her supervisor, an older flight attendant named Kiana Ford, leaned over her shoulder. "Is that who I think it is?" Kiana whispered. Madeline looked up. "Who do you think it is?" "My brother flew F-16 seconds in the early 2000s. He used to tell me stories about a pilot they called Phantom. Said the guy flew missions that shouldn't have been possible. Brought people home when everyone else had given up." Kiana paused. He said, "Phantom disappeared after some mission went wrong. Or went right. He was never clear on the details." Madeline's pulse quickened. "Was your brother one of the pilots he saved?" Kiana nodded slowly. "He never said it outright. Classified stuff. But he named his son Xavier, said it was after someone who taught him that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about flying anyway." The two women stood in silence, watching through the window as Xavier emerged from the hangar. He carried something small in his hands, a box that caught the fading sunlight. On the tarmac, Commander Elise Porter walked beside Xavier toward a waiting helicopter. Its rotors began to spin, creating a wind that pulled at their clothes and hair. Xavier stopped just before reaching the aircraft and turned back toward the commercial plane. He couldn't see individual faces through the small windows, but he knew they were watching. All of them, judging, reassessing, understanding. "They're going to have questions," Xavier said to Elise. "Let them question. You don't owe them explanations." Some of them were cruel, dismissive. Elise smiled. And now they'll carry that regret. Maybe it'll make them think twice before judging the next person they meet. Xavier looked down at the wooden box in his hands. I spent 3 years trying to be invisible. In one afternoon, that's gone. You were never really invisible, Xavier. You just convinced yourself you were. Elise gestured toward the helicopter. Your ride's waiting. Summer's waiting. Xavier nodded and climbed into the aircraft. As the door closed and the helicopter lifted off, he looked down at the plane one last time, at the faces in the windows, at the life he'd tried to leave behind. Inside the cabin, passengers watched the helicopter bank toward Seattle. It's running, lights blinking against the darkening sky. Dylan Porter finally found his voice. I was terrible to him. Chloe turned to look at him. Yes, you were. I judged him based on his jacket, his bag, the way he looked. Yes, you did. Dylan slumped in his seat. How do I fix that? You can't, but you can learn from it. A teenage girl in row 8 raised her phone, capturing video of the helicopter as it disappeared toward the horizon. My friends aren't going to believe this, she whispered. Her mother placed a hand on her arm. Maybe you don't post it. Maybe some moments are meant to stay private. The girl lowered her phone, considering. But people should know. He's a hero. He is. But he chose privacy for a reason. The best way to honor him is to respect that choice. The girl nodded slowly, deleting the video. Madeline made an announcement over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing for Seattle in approximately 15 minutes. Thank you for your patience during this unusual stop. Sometimes the universe reminds us that every person has a story worth respecting. She clicked off the mic and turned to Kiana. Should we tell people who he was? Kiana shook her head. We let them wonder. Wonder is better than certainty sometimes. It keeps people humble. Back in the cabin, the elderly veteran stood and addressed the passengers around him. I don't know what you all witnessed today, but I want you to remember something. The man who sat in seat 12 Farads, who helped people without being asked, who saved someone's life mid-flight, who walked off this plane to a military honor guard, that man represents something we've lost. What's that? Someone asked. Quiet service. Humble sacrifice. The idea that heroism doesn't require an audience. Several passengers nodded. A few wiped tears from their eyes. Dylan Porter pulled out his phone and opened the email draft he'd started earlier, the one mocking Xavier. He stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. In its place, he typed something new. Today I learned that you can't judge a person's worth by their appearance. I sat next to a hero and treated him like he was beneath me. I'll carry that shame as a reminder to do better, to see better, to be better. He saved it as a draft, unsure if he'd ever send it, but needing to write it anyway. Outside, the sun completed its descent, and the base lights flickered on, illuminating runways and hangars in geometric patterns. The commercial plane prepared for departure, engines warming, crew completing final checks, and in every seat, in every heart, something had shifted. Because sometimes you fly with angels and don't realize it until they spread their wings. The helicopter cut through the evening sky with purposeful speed, its rotors thumping a steady rhythm that Xavier felt in his chest. He sat in the passenger compartment, the wooden box containing his medal resting on his lap, while the pilot navigated toward SeaTac International Airport. Through the window, Xavier watched the landscape transform from military precision to civilian sprawl. Highways snaked through valleys, subdivisions clustered around commercial centers, and somewhere down there, in the arrivals terminal, Summer was waiting. His phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket and saw a text from his neighbor. The woman who'd driven Summer to the airport. She's been at the window for an hour, won't sit down, keeps saying she'll see your plane first. Xavier smiled, typed a response. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her I'm almost there. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. Sir, we're 10 minutes out. They're clearing a landing pad for us on the north side of the terminal. You'll have direct access to arrivals. Thank you, Xavier replied. As they approached the airport, Xavier noticed something unusual. Below, on one of the distant runways, two F-22 Raptors sat in formation, their canopies catching the last rays of sunlight. They weren't taking off or landing. They were simply there, positioned like sentries. "What's that about?" Xavier asked the pilot. The pilot's voice carried a smile. "Commander Porter arranged it, sir. Said you deserved an escort, even if it's just symbolic." Xavier's throat tightened. Elise hadn't mentioned this, but it was exactly the kind of gesture she would make, honoring him in a way that required no audience, no fanfare, just respect, expressed through presence. The helicopter descended, touching down gently on a marked pad near a service entrance. Ground crew immediately approached, securing the aircraft and opening the passenger door. Xavier stepped out, duffel bag over his shoulder, metal box tucked carefully under one arm. A security officer waited nearby, radio in hand. "Mr. Grant? I'm Officer Landon Pierce. I'll escort you to the arrivals terminal." "Thank you." They walked through a series of corridors, past baggage handling systems and employee break rooms, following signs that eventually led to a set of doors marked "Arrivals. Public access." Officer Pierce paused before opening the door. "Sir, I just want to say, my father served in Desert Storm. He always told me the real heroes are the ones who come home and don't talk about it. I think he would have respected you." Xavier nodded, unsure how to respond. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Pierce opened the door. The arrivals terminal exploded with noise and movement. Families reuniting, business travelers rushing toward ground transportation, children running between luggage carts, the chaos of civilian life in full display. And there, pressed against the window barrier, stood Summer. She was taller than Xavier remembered, her dark hair pulled into a ponytail, wearing the purple jacket he'd sent her for her birthday. Her eyes scanned the crowd desperately, searching. Then she saw him. "Daddy." The word tore from her throat like a battle cry. She launched herself over the barrier, ignoring the protests of the neighbor trying to hold her back, and ran across the terminal floor. People scattered, smiling, creating a path. Xavier dropped his duffel bag and caught her mid-flight, lifting her into his arms as she wrapped her legs around his waist and her arms around his neck. "You came back," she sobbed into his shoulder. "You came back. Always." Xavier whispered, his voice breaking. "I'll always come back." She pulled away slightly, looking at his face with tear-streaked cheeks. "You look different." "Different how?" "Like you're not hiding anymore." Xavier's breath caught. How did she know? How could a 9-year-old see what he'd been doing to himself for 3 years? "I'm not hiding," he said. "Not from you. Never from you." Summer noticed the wooden box tucked under his arm. "What's that?" Xavier set her down gently, knelt to her level, and opened the box. The Air Force Cross gleamed in the terminal lights, its silver surface reflecting their faces. "This," Xavier said carefully, "is something they gave me for work I did a long time ago, before you were born. Before I became your dad." Summer's eyes widened. "Is it a treasure?" "Sort of. It's a reminder." "Of what?" "That sometimes people do hard things so other people can be safe. And sometimes those people don't talk about it because the work isn't about being famous. It's about keeping promises." Summer touched the metal gently, her small fingers tracing the eagle's wings. "Did you keep your promises?" "I tried to. And when I had to choose between one promise and another, I chose you." She looked up at him, her expression serious beyond her years. "Because I'm your most important promise. Because you're my only promise that matters." Summer threw her arms around his neck again, and Xavier held her, the metal box forgotten on the floor, the terminal noise fading to background static. Around them, people had stopped to watch. Some pulled out phones, not to record, but to wipe tears from their eyes. A TSA agent stood at her checkpoint, hand over her heart. A pilot, passing by, paused, recognized something in Xavier's bearing, and saluted quietly. The neighbor who'd brought Summer approached, picking up Xavier's duffel bag. "Welcome home. Thank you for taking care of her. She's easy to love, talks about you constantly. Said her dad was a hero." Xavier looked down at Summer, still clinging to him. "She's wrong. She's the hero. She's what kept me alive when I didn't want to be." The neighbor smiled knowingly. "I think you're both right." As they walked toward the exit, Summer chattering about school and friends and the picture she'd drawn for him, Xavier felt something shift inside. The weight he'd been carrying, the guilt over walking away from the squadron, the fear that he'd abandoned something important, it didn't disappear. But it changed, because he realized that he hadn't abandoned anything. He'd chosen something greater. He'd chosen love over glory, presence over legend, life over memory. Outside the terminal, the evening had deepened into night. Xavier carried Summer on his shoulders, her hands in his hair, her laughter cutting through the parking lot noise. Above them, barely visible against the dark sky, two contrails streaked across the horizon. The F-22 seconds, returning to base. Xavier stopped, lowered Summer from his shoulders, and pointed upward. "See those lines? From planes? From very special planes, flown by very special people. Did you used to fly those?" Xavier hesitated, then nodded. "I did. A long time ago." "Were you scared?" "Every single time. But you did it anyway. Because that's what you do when people need you. You fly anyway." Summer considered this, then took his hand. "I'm glad you stopped flying. I like having you here." Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." They walked toward the car, past families and travelers, past the mundane machinery of daily life. Behind them, the terminal glowed with artificial light. Above them, the stars began to emerge. And somewhere, in the distance, the sound of jet engines faded to silence, carrying with them the echo of a call sign that would live forever in classified files and whispered stories. Phantom 1. The Ghost Who Came Home. 3 weeks after the incident at McCord Air Force Base, Xavier Grant stood in the kitchen of his modest apartment, packing Summer's lunch for school. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, a granola bar, and a note folded into a small square. The same routine he'd followed every morning since returning home. The wooden box containing his Air Force cross sat on a shelf in his bedroom closet, tucked behind old photo albums and winter clothes. He'd shown it to Summer once, answered her questions honestly but carefully, then put it away. It wasn't something he needed to see every day. What he needed was this. The sound of Summer brushing her teeth in the bathroom, the smell of coffee brewing, the morning light streaming through windows that overlooked a parking lot instead of a runway. "Daddy, can you braid my hair?" Summer called from the hallway. "Come here." She bounded into the kitchen, hairbrush in hand, and sat on the chair he'd pulled out. Xavier's large, scarred hands worked through her dark hair with surprising gentleness, weaving 3 strands into a pattern his wife had taught him years ago during her final months. "Kiana from school said her mom saw a video of you online," Summer said, "with soldiers saluting you." Xavier's hands paused briefly, then continued braiding. "What did you tell her?" "I said my dad helps people. That's what heroes do." "And what did Kiana say?" "She said her mom cried watching it. She said you looked sad." Xavier tied off the braid with an elastic band and turned Summer to face him. "I wasn't sad. I was remembering people I used to know. People who aren't here anymore." "Because they flew away?" Xavier smiled faintly. "Something like that." Summer hugged him suddenly, fiercely. "I'm glad you stopped flying. I don't want you to fly away. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. Not anymore." The video Kiana's mother had seen was the one Madeline Brooks had recorded. Despite the airline's request that she delete it, she'd shared it with a military family support group she volunteered with. From there, it had spread quietly through veteran communities, never going viral, never reaching mainstream news, but circulating among those who understood what they were witnessing. Xavier had received a handful of messages through old contacts. Other Phantom Squadron members reaching out, sharing their lives, their families, their gratitude. He'd responded to each one briefly, warmly, but made it clear he wasn't returning to that world. Commander Elise Porter had texted him twice, once to make sure he'd arrived home safely, once to invite him to a squadron reunion. He'd declined the reunion politely. Some doors, once closed, were meant to stay that way. After dropping Summer at school, Xavier drove to his job at a small aviation museum on the outskirts of Seattle. He worked in aircraft restoration, bringing old planes back to display condition. The pay was modest. The work was physical, and nobody asked about his past. His supervisor, an elderly man named Ryder Maxwell, who'd flown cargo planes in Vietnam, had recognized something in Xavier from the first interview but never pushed for details. This morning, Ryder met him at the workshop door. "Got a visitor," Ryder said. "Waited outside for you." Xavier's chest tightened. "Who?" "Didn't give a name. Just said she flew with you once." Around the corner of the building, Chloe Martinez waited beside her car. She wore jeans and a light jacket, her hair down instead of pulled back in the professional style she'd worn on the plane. "Chloe," Xavier said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I tracked down where you worked. Wasn't hard, honestly. Small community when you know where to look." She smiled. "I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For pressing you on the plane. For not respecting your privacy when it was clear you wanted to be left alone." Xavier leaned against the workshop wall. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were just trying to understand. Still, I work with veterans every day, and I should have recognized that not everyone wants their service acknowledged publicly." She paused. "I also wanted to tell you something. That day changed how I do my work." "How so?" "I stopped assuming I know what veterans need. I started asking more, listening better, understanding that healing looks different for everyone." Chloe pulled an envelope from her jacket. "This is from the nonprofit I work for. We're starting a fund for veterans who want to transition quietly, without the spotlight, without the pressure to be public about their service. We're calling it the Phantom Fund." Xavier took the envelope, opened it. Inside was a simple card with the fund's information and a handwritten note. "For those who served in silence and deserve to heal the same way." His throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just know that what you represent, that quiet dignity, it matters. It helps people." After Chloe left, Xavier stood in the workshop, surrounded by half-restored aircraft, holding the card in his hands. Around him, the smell of paint and oil mixed with the scent of old canvas and metal. It was honest work. Simple work. The kind that let him sleep at night. That evening, Xavier and Summer sat on their apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Commercial jets crossed overhead, their contrails catching the fading light. "Do you miss it?" Summer asked. "Flying?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "I miss parts of it. The freedom, the sky, the people. But not enough to go back." He pulled her close. "Not even close. Because everything I need is right here." Summer leaned against him, content. "Daddy?" "Yeah? You're still a hero, even if nobody knows." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "The only person who needs to know is you." Above them, another plane crossed the sky, its engines a distant whisper. Xavier watched it pass, felt the familiar pull in his chest, the muscle memory of stick and throttle, of speed and altitude and the endless blue. Then he looked down at his daughter and felt something stronger. Love, presence, peace, the things worth landing for. And in that moment, Xavier Grant, once known as Phantom 1, understood that the greatest mission he'd ever flown wasn't the ones documented in classified files. It was this one. Being here, being present, being enough. Not for the world, but for her. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.